All right, can you guys hear me okay? All right. Well, welcome. Thanks for showing up. My name is Rob Yeager, and I'm going to be going over, for server admins, don't fear web authoring. So this course is going to be really focused on server administration, but it's how it pertains to web authoring and allowing it and having your end users have data freedom to everything that they need. So I've got a lot of stuff I want to cover. I'm just going to spend a couple minutes talking about me. I've been using Tableau desktop for 7 years, and I've been a server administrator for 6 years. So I'm going to go over kind of the timelines when we bought all this stuff, but as far as a server administrator goes, it's a little bit different than probably your typical Tableau server admin. So we do all the hardware installs, all the RAM upgrades, disk adds, software updates, OS updates. We pretty much do everything. Running cables, spliced a few Cat5s together in my day. So quite a bit of stuff we do with this. But on the desktop side, I also assign all the desktop licenses for the network organization and do development on desktop, publish data sources, a little bit of everything. So if it's Tableau related and it's within Sprint, I'm involved in some way, shape, or form. So use that information to ask your questions however you want at the end of this. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get going into the content. So first of all, let's talk about how much Tableau Sprint is using. And to really understand it, we're going to do a little history. So this is a little bit of an eye chart, but we have two views here, created in Tableau, by the way. Top part is our servers, and bottom part is our desktop licenses. This is when we've purchased them over the years. So it all started back in summer of 2009. I was in a group called Service Management, and we started the trial. Started with a couple desktop licenses. Me and another guy named John Kopak started the trial. Ended up buying 5 desktops for our organization. Started playing around with it, doing a lot of stuff, finding a lot of things in our data, to the point where we decided we needed to get a server. So then in September 2010, we bought our first server, and it was an Interactor license. If you guys are familiar with that, there's 2 different types of licensing you can buy, either by core license or Interactor. Basically, we could allow up to 50 people onto our server with this Interactor license. So that server started on a Pentium desktop underneath my desk, and it was running there for from September till about January of the following year, so 2011. So even though it was sitting on my little Pentium desktop, we were doing a lot of good stuff with it. Getting a lot of notice, finding a lot of stuff in our data, to the point where in February of the following year, we ended up having to buy some more Interactor licenses, bumped it up to 85. And what we did with those licenses is we started to allow other teams within our organization to use our server, start using some of our workbooks that we had created. And this is pre-published data sources to kind of date it back then. So we had all these workbooks that we're using, hand out a couple extra desktops, started to have a couple more organizations really start buying into this whole Tableau process. One of those organizations that bought into it was network engineering. And that was, they're the ones with the money. Our little team, we were selling plasma to get Tableau desktops. These guys have the budget for it. So in 2012, they decided they wanted their own server as well. So they bought their own 50 Interactor license, but we hosted it for them on our platform. So we were running our 85 Interactor and their 50 Interactor at the same time. If you look across the bottom, we were gradually adding desktop licenses. We were adding a few, they were adding a few, but both organizations were growing within Tableau. As I mentioned, network engineering, they were the ones with the budget. So in June of 2013, they finally bought an 8-core. They saw everything that they were doing with the Interactor license and decided that they wanted to do more, they wanted to go bigger. So they bought an 8-core, but they asked our IT team in order to manage it for them. We still kept their Interactor license running, and along as our Interactor license, and as you see, we actually bought 50 more Interactors for us as well. So we were supporting 2 Interactor platforms, and IT was going to support the core one. Well, they ran into some problems with IT hosting it because they were hosting it in a typical BI fashion. They wanted to control what data was supposed to go onto it, who could access it, who could access what data, what had to be behind firewalls, what had to be outside of the firewall. And they were not getting the adoption they want because no one could get to what they wanted in a timely fashion. They couldn't get to the data the next day. It took weeks because of the processes and stuff. So this went on. They didn't see a lot of growth. They didn't get a lot of adoption. So finally, back in March of 2014, network engineering came back to us and says, hey, can you host our 8-core as well as our interactor? And we said, sure, we'll take care of it. We opened up everything like we were doing previously with their interactor license, and it took off. Started allowing all the end users, all of network engineering to use our server, or the 8-core server, and it just exploded. We went from 8 cores. 2 months later, we were already saturated. We had to buy another 8 cores. Got to 16. And it kept growing and kept growing, to the point where we realized we can't keep things segregated across 3 platforms anymore. We decided we were going to consolidate our 2 interactor platforms and our core platform into one. So we got rid of all of our interactor licenses and bought more cores. Got 12 more at that point. So that took us up to 28, and that was in October 2014. Well, it wasn't done. We kept growing, kept growing. We added 16, then we added another 16, then we added another 12, then we added another 16. So that got us to where we are today. We're at 88 cores. And if you go back in the timeline, back in March of 2014, we were sitting at 8. So that's 80 cores of growth in just under 2 years. Yeah, it was a fun 2 years, let's just say. Now, if you look at the bottom, we had desktops. We were adding desktops, but at a gradual pace. So we were getting content put on the server by desktops, but it didn't warrant that kind of growth. All that's been put there by web authoring. We opened up the gates for web authoring, and it caused that need. Now, just recently, we've purchased 300 desktops, and that kind of changes a little bit of the topics we're going to cover on this, but the reason why we did that is because we've seen the benefits of Tableau, and we want to take full advantage of Tableau. Some of the things that you can do in web authoring or things you do in desktop don't exactly exist in web authoring yet. So some of the stuff they covered yesterday kind of negates the reasons we bought these desktops, but I'm sure they're okay that we bought them. Okay, so we've talked about that stuff, but like I said, this is a server class. This is for admins, so let's bring it on. You guys want to see what's under the hood? Before we do that, let's talk about the clusters. We support 3. First one is our active cluster. This is our production system, supports all the content, all of the users. Our second cluster is called standby. This is an exact mirror of our active system. We actually take the backup from our active system at 12:30 every night, restore it onto our standby system, and it's running all the time. So we have it for during upgrades, during maintenance, any outages. We can switch the traffic over to that one, and it handles everything. And our third cluster is beta. This is where we do beta testing. We've been part of beta testing since version 6. Right now it's running 10.1. 10.2 is going to come out here, I think, next week, so we'll load that one up. But we also use it for other things, permission validation, and it's just playground. We want to see how things interact with our server or how Tableau changes from version to version. We play with it over there. Now, all 3 of these clusters sit behind a pair of F5 load balancers. So I can route traffic from my active to my standby to my beta wherever I want it, whatever traffic I want. So very, very convenient. Now, I'll go over how that's all kind of connected and how it all works at a very high level. But before we get into the hardware part of it, let's talk about how we have it configured. So as I mentioned, our active and our standby are mirrors of each other. And each one of them is a 6-node cluster. And we break up our nodes into 2 separate groups. We have our backgrounders and we have our vizquelers. So we'll talk about backgrounders first. If you see these in our numbering scheme, they're on our nodes 1002, 2002, and 3002. Each one of them is running 12 cores and 64 gig of RAM. If you look at the processes they're running, they're doing nothing but backgrounders. So each one of those is running 8 background processes, and that's it. Doesn't even have gateways, nothing else. Very isolated. Now our other ones we call vizquelers. They do a lot more than vizquel, but this is where all of our user traffic exists. And that's in our servers 1001, 2001, and 3001 on both clusters. Now if you look at them, they are all 16 cores and 192 gig of RAM, with the exception of our primaries. Our primaries are running 20 cores each instead. Reason why? Well, I bought 88 cores of license. I'm going to use 88 cores wherever I can. So we bump those up to 20 because your primaries do a little bit more work than your normal workers, but not to too much. But on our active system, there's actually another reason why we did it that way, and I'll explain that once we get into the hardware part of it. So as you look, we have a gateway on each one of them. 1001, 2001, and 3001 each has a gateway, and exactly mirrored. All the other processes are mirrored across each one of them. Application server, VizQL, cache server, search and browse, data server, data engine, file store. Every single one of them is identical to each other. Only difference is our repository. Repository only exists on two. That's the limitation of the platform. All right. So that explains our active and our standby. Now beta, like I said, it's very dynamic. We change it however we need to. Right now it's sitting at a 24 core, 64 gig box. But we actually will throw in another node when we're doing HA testing. We change the RAM, we change the number of cores with it, whatever we have to test. How we do that is all of our platform is virtual. We run in VMs for absolutely everything. So that gets us into this. Now this is a little crazy. I'm going to walk you through it. First thing I'm going to point out with this fancy dancy laser is our two networks. So we have an enterprise network that's illustrated in the orange lines, and our private F5 network is illustrated in blue. So kind of understand how we got to this goes back to the history of where we started and how we got here. So before, when I said it was underneath my desk, when we got rid of that one, moved from my little Pentium, we bought this Dell R710 sitting down here. It's called our physical .20. That's where we put our first 50 interactor license. And it's in a full-fledged data center. It's not sitting in a closet. It's a legit server. Well, as we kept growing, we added more interactor licenses and started hosting network engineering's interactor license. I just fired up more VMs on that same server. We could expand within that. Now, if you look, all of these here are just tied into our enterprise network. They're following the orange paths. Okay, I'll explain more of that here as we go on. When they asked us to take over their 8-core, that's when we added our physical .10. And that's a Dell R720 server. So we threw the 8-core up there while we're still hosting our interactors down here on .20. All of them are still just on our enterprise network, and that was it. Well, as I said, we took off, started growing. 2 months later, I had to turn up another 8 cores. If this was a physical environment, I'd have to fire up a new box, get it installed, do all this other stuff. In a virtual, as long as you have the big enough processors to handle it, I just add another VM. I had 2 8-core VMs running. Actually, I think at that point we were running 10 and 6. My VizQLers were running on a 10-core, and my backgrounders were running on a 6-core. Well, as we kept going, like I said, these are still on our enterprise network. We added hardware redundancy. I got rid of my VizQLer, my interactors down here on .20 because I traded them in and bought more cores. So we also bought .50. This is our next physical box. This is a Dell R720 XD. A lot more drives that goes into it. And we added that one in fall of 2014. We had hardware redundancy because I had my core split across .10 and .50. Problem is, I'm still sitting on the enterprise network. So all my IP addresses were still controlled by IT. If I had to do, all of my routing was going to a single IP. So all my DNS lookups were going to a single IP and only being delivered into .50. If I ever had to do Windows updates on .50, for example, I had to take it down. Well, I lost my server because I couldn't alt route unless I had an IT put an alt route in for it, which was a several-week process in order to get that put in. So we saw some problems that we're going to do there. We saw that we were still growing. We decided we need to take a little bit more control, have some flexibility, and also have some scalability with it. And that's when we added these F5s. So with our F5s, we also added physical.63 and physical.65. And these are Dell R730 XDs. Okay. So we put those into play once we got up to 44 cores. And that's when we added the VMs on each one of them. So you see we have AP 1001, 1002 on our physical server number 1. We have 2001, 2002 on our second physical, and 3001 and 3002 on our third physical. So you understanding the naming scheme now? If it's in the 1000, that's the physical that it sits on. And if you remember, our backgrounders all ended in 2, and all of our VizQLers all ended in 1. So we have redundancy across all of our hardware as well. So having redundancies across the virtuals, we also have redundancy across all the hardware. Now these are all now sitting on our F5 network, including the gateways. So we have a gateway in each of them. So I have a gateway going into each physical. If I lose one physical, the F5 will now just round robin between the remaining two. All three of them up, it'll round robin between all three of them. I lose two physicals, I can still just deliver traffic just to one of them. So the benefit that we did here is I'm using 3 physical boxes 24/7. I don't have physical servers sitting there in a standby configuration waiting to be used. I'm not wasting any resources because I move my standby cluster is actually sit on the same physicals, just different VMs. And each one of those has a gateway. Each one of those has a gateway coming from each physical as well, going to the F5. The other thing that I want to show is that in our naming scheme, we have this AP 1001, that's our primary. And we have SP 2001, so that's a primary. Now, we mentioned before that I put 20 cores on my active system for another reason besides just burning cores. Well, this is an older physical. It's running slower processors and a little bit slower RAM. But because I'm in a virtual environment, I can actually throw more cores at it or different RAM at it and keep my utilization more balanced across all three boxes. So when we need to move traffic or we're doing an upgrade, I can just go into the F5 and say, stop delivering traffic to the green boxes, start delivering to the purple boxes. Now, if I have an outage, need to deal with that, I have a primary on my active clusters over here. But I have my primary for my standby clusters over there. So there's a little timer that goes on if you happen to lose your primary. And I don't know if they fixed it with 10, haven't looked into it all. But you had to be able to re-register your license within, I think it was 24 or 48 hours. If your server was down for more than that, you may not be able to come back up. So with this, we've separated our primaries into 2 separate physicals. So if I lost the .50 server, I lost my primary. Well, I can just move traffic over to my standby and I can run over here and be fine. But what if I lost .50 and .63? Should be catastrophic, but actually, I put the primary for my beta over on the other one as well. So if I happen to lose 50 and 63, I can just restore the backup over there and run at a lower capacity on one server. And since it's all virtual, if you notice, I still have this server, my old .10, that's doing nothing except running a Linux box and a domain controller. Big, still powerful box, but I have access to my F5. I can fire up VMs over there if I lose any of these other 3 to accommodate more traffic and just route traffic to it with the F5. So crazy, ridiculous redundancy. Probably more than you'll ever need. But. Okay, so now we kind of explained everything that we do. Why didn't this thing change? There we go. So what do you do with the server? Got all this hardware, got all these cores. Honestly, we only do one thing. And that one thing is we give the end user controlled data freedom. Data freedom, but it's controlled. And what I get in return is a boatload of content. When I made these slides, we had almost 30,000 views on it, about 5,000 workbooks, 1,600 data sources, and it was all put there by 1,300 users. It's grown now. I made these slides back in September. We're actually close to about 1,500 users, and we actually did cross over the 30,000 view mark. But these users aren't just using their own content. They're looking at other people's content and customizing by changing some filters and storing customized views. I got 12,000 of those. And they're all really lazy. They don't want to come get their data. They want me to send it to them. I send 7,000 subscriptions every week. So it's all pretty busy. That kind of understanding why I have 3 servers doing nothing but backgrounders now. And all this is in 145 projects. All right. So, like I said, this is the data freedom. I gave them the freedom. They've made all this content for me, and let's get into the controlling part of it. Biggest thing about controlling it is using published data sources. That's crucial. So in our application, or our server, we have 83% of all the content that's on our server is using a published data source. Next closest thing is Excel. And the only reason Excel's there is because we do so much blending. Now, everybody benefits from published data sources. You know, it's not just you, the end user. If you have desktop users, they don't need to have all the drivers. You know, we have SQL Server connections, Teradata, Netezza, MySQL, Oracle, Postgres. If you were a desktop user and you need to connect all those, you need all those drivers on your PC. And if it's an IT-controlled resource, now you're opening up a ticket for every driver. Sometimes they don't have it. Sometimes they're not allowed. With using published data sources, they just need a connection to your server. That's it. So it's a benefit for them. Now, the other thing is data governance. We have a lot of KPIs that are formulas. Take this, divide it by that, multiply it by this, subtract that. Well, when our network, our cell sites, or infrastructure that provides the cellular service, they get revisions to the software. Sometimes those formulas need to change to accommodate new changes in the network. Well, we just make the change to the formula in the data source. Every workbook that uses it now reflects that change. You don't have to go out and change all of your different workbooks in order to accommodate it. Next thing is access control. Different types of data need different type of restrictions on who can get to it. Some of your DBAs want to make sure they want to know exactly his. They want to make sure people have to have database credentials in order to use the data. You can build it. You can still use a published data source. You just make it a pass-through. They still have to log into the database, but they don't need the drivers in order to do it. Now, if you're not so limited on that they have to have published data sources or have database credentials, but you still need to limit who can see the data, just put in different projects. Set up your permissions so you can move a data source from one project to the other, and depending on the permissions you assign to that project, different people can get to it. And the last thing is that we use quite a bit, and I don't know if it falls into everybody, but is data source filters. Now, if you're not familiar with those, it's basically like a global where clause. What it does is any query that hits that data source will also apply a where clause that's associated with that data source filter. So in our databases, we have a big Netezza system that has 4 or 5 years worth of data. But we don't want our end users to be querying clear back 4 years when most of the content, 95% of all the dashboards that they're ever going to create, is going to be within the last 6 months. Instead of having to have a DBA go out there and make a new view or build the data separate so you have a 6-month table and then have a historical table, we just make one PDS that has that where clause in it that only shows 6 months. So they're scanning a lot less I/O on your back end. And they have a lot more faster response, but I didn't have to change anything in the back end. I make another PDS that is called historical, just doesn't have the where clause. So if they do need to get back 4 years, they can connect to that one. If they want to be more faster, more agile with their reporting, they do the one that has the global filter. End user doesn't know it's the exact same table. As a server admin, the benefit of a PDS or published data source, reduction of your background tasks. You're not refreshing as many things. Instead of having 200 workbooks that you have to refresh individually, you have one data source that 200 workbooks use that you refresh once. And the other thing is you get increased caching opportunities. So the more times that you're hitting or sending the exact same queries back to the database, if it's live, it's going to be cached more.
How many data sources do you have?
Just over 1,600. So all this content, we're talking about controlled data freedom, and the controlling part of the data sources, you make them published. Well, 61% of all the content on our server was put there by web authoring. How do these guys know what to do, how to start, where to go from, what data source to use? That was decided by the other 38%. And what we do is we encourage our desktop developers to design so the end user does all the work for them. They don't need to keep developing their own workbooks. They have to tweak and change for every individual user. So for the web authoring part, we build web editing templates. And what I mean by that is we create a workbook that has a couple different examples of views. A dual axis chart, a metric over time, a scatter plot with multiple metrics, whatever it is. You give them basically a template that says this is how you can start. And then that workbook is already connected to a published data source that has the data that they need at the aggregation level that they need. So if it's a web edit template for monthly reporting, the data source has monthly aggregated data. It's not using an hourly aggregated data source. Now, besides setting up things for web authoring, we also tell them, hey, take advantage of filtering. When you build your dashboards, put filters on it so the end user can customize it and call it their own. So put those quick filters on there. You have a guy out in California who only cares about California, make your dashboard so it has a state filter. He can filter it to just California, say save customized view, stores it on server. He can subscribe to it, so it just gets his stuff. And they don't have to create another dashboard. It's just a small little XML that gets appended up in your server to know what filters need to be applied for that guy. And the other thing is use relative date filters if possible. So they said subscriptions, we send out about 7,000 of them every week, is the benefit is relative date. All of our users want to know, hey, what happened yesterday? You know, which cell sites dropped what calls? When was our throughput when all these people showed up at Austin? And with a relative date filter, they set it up. It shows up yesterday's data or shows up the last week's data. They subscribe to it. They don't have to come out to my server and find out what happened yesterday. We deliver it to them at 8 a.m. And the other thing is we tell them, when you're making your data sources, be efficient about it. You know, have your different aggregations. If you're making a PDS that you want people to use for a monthly report, aggregate it to a monthly. Don't make that template to use an hourly database when you know you're trying to set it up so they'll do our week or monthly reporting off of it. All right, so how do we control it? Well, let's get into some permissions. All right. So first of all, if you're not familiar with permissions, that you control your content with projects and you control your users with groups. So we'll start projects first and go over the content control. So every organization that has a team of developers or is making a lot of stuff within Tableau, they get a set of projects. Okay? And the name is defined by the organization they're in and their team that they're part of. So over here to the right, we have network engineering is the team that we're going to kind of explain things with. The different projects you get, first of all, we have control. And I'm actually going to demo this, time permitting, in a little bit here. But control is where we put all of our data sources. You have a data source, you don't care who uses it, it's just data. Anybody has access to the server, you put it there. Lock. This is where you want to control things. You have a workbook or a data source that, hey, you want to put it out there, but you want to say who can have access to it. You throw it in your lock. We set up the permissions to make sure it can only the right people get to it. Open is kind of like your production space. You have something that you want to make, nice dashboard. You want the world to use it, but you don't want anybody to steal your work. That's where you put it in there. If you put it in open, people cannot web edit it. People cannot download it. So if they have desktop, they can't steal your work. Next one's sandbox. This is your dev space. We don't have a development server and a production server. Split it up this way. It's so much easier, especially when you're using published data sources, because you can build both a developing workbook and a production workbook off the same data source. That way you're not running into version controls and stuff. So this dev space, only people in your team can actually see the sandbox. So you can move things, build things, collaborate with your team in order to make the changes. You put it there. Next one's web edit, just like open. You don't care who sees it or who uses it, and you don't care if they download it. You don't care if they web edit it. And one we don't have listed here is limit. There's actually different names we can put for it, and this is where we build hybrids. Hey, you got something that you want people to be able to use, but you don't want them to do a certain part of it, or you want to limit who actually uses it. There are different permissions that they can do within it. We make limits, or different hybrids that you want. Example we have with this one, we had a team that says, we don't care who looks at it, they just can't download the data. We don't want them to steal the data off the server and then put it in Excel and start making their own reports or making things that doesn't pertain or isn't maybe showing the same result that they want to show. And the last project we have is called Open Org Sandbox, and this one it's network. This is a generic write space for the entire organization. If you're web authoring, that's where you write it to. If you're a new desktop user and your team hasn't warranted enough work to get your own projects, you write to there. And it's set up like a web edit folder. Anything that goes there can be downloaded and can be web edited. So it really helps with collaboration and content sharing and knowledge sharing. You can see this one, at the time I took it, had 13,000 views in it.
So where's the data sources for that sandbox? Do they use the
Any of
control
them.
data sources? Any of
Yep.
them you can save there?
Any team that has a control folder, they put it in there so you can use it. You're not limited to a certain silo of data. You can use any team's
So all your
data
data
sources.
sources are completely open.
Yes, unless they're in a lock or a sandbox.
Those are the exceptions, not the rule lines.
Yeah, well, yes, that's pretty much it.
Private, the data has to be private.
Yeah, has to be. Okay. Yes, there's 3 of us. Okay, so let's get into groups. Much simpler than the projects. Basically, you have dev and external allow. And the naming is the same thing. Organization team. This one happens to be the organization of service management and the team called voice. You have developers, and then you have external allow. Dev, anybody can read and write. So those 5 projects that I lined out, if you're a dev, you can read and write to any of those projects. And then we have external allow. This is where you allow people into your sandbox or into your locks to view any information, like end user testing. You built this thing, you want people to use it, but you don't want out in the free world until they say give the thumbs up. We put them in external allow and they can see it. And then we have open org. Just like we have an open network sandbox, we also have open network. And the reason why is we don't use the all users group, if you guys are familiar with that, for any of our permissions. We basically have thrown that out. Each organization gets its own kind of all users group. So anyone that's in that group can see any open and any web edit folder for that organization. And they're also allowed to write to open network sandbox. And the last group we have is called open org desk or open network desk. This is where we assign our desktop users to. But it's not just to identify desktop users. This is how we can control what people are web authoring. Because if you're not in that group, you don't see any of the control folders. You don't see any of the data sources. So when you web author, all you see is workbooks that you can start with. That way we don't have people going and grabbing all these different data sources and just start web authoring without knowing exactly how much they're querying and what they're building. We have local authentication, and that kind of goes back to the history that they're not getting into. But since we weren't IT, we weren't allowed to use IT. But now we're kind of built our own thing that actually works better than AD. So, okay, before I get into the little demo about the permissions, this is how you put content on it. You have content on our server, you want to put on our server. Does your team have projects? If you don't, guess what? You got one location, open network sandbox, that's where you go. If your team does, is it a workbook or is it a data source? Well, it doesn't matter if it's, is it still in development? If it is, you throw it in your team sandbox folder. Is it not in development? You're ready to go for prime time, but do you need restricted access? If you do, you throw it in your lock. Or if you have some hybrid you want, we'll make you a limit. We'll make you whatever you want to call it, but different permissions, whatever you need. If it's a database, or a published data source, and you don't have any restrictions for it, throw it in your control. If you want to workbook, do you want to allow web authoring? Nope. Throw it in open. And if you do, you throw it in web edit. Okay, so let me hop out of this real quick. What I did here is I actually restored one of our backups to my laptop without any content. Basically, I restored the repository onto my laptop, so I'm running a sudo 88-core server on my 4-core laptop. But we're going to have, I'm in as admin in Chrome, and then I'll log in to here as a test user. And I loaded up the Western Michigan logo. Any Broncos in the house? Yeah, I think so. But that's my alma mater. They're actually doing really well in football this year. Okay, right now I'm logged in. You can see I have 0 workbooks, 0, I can't see a thing. So let's look at what groups this guy's in. He's only in all users. So I'm going to put him in open network now. Save it. Come back here and refresh. He went from seeing nothing to seeing 22,000 views. And there's really more. I had to delete some of the stuff that I can't accidentally show you even names of, so that's why it doesn't match my slides. But then you also see 41 projects. But if you look at the projects, open web edit, open web edit, open web edit. Don't see anything else. And he only sees 6 data sources. I've been telling you I have like 1,500 of them. So let's go into desktop. I'm only going to do this once, but let's say I want to connect to a data source on that server. I only see those 6. So what I'm showing you in the web is going to be the same thing as desktop, but I'm not going to get back into desktop for any more of these so I don't accidentally show you some stuff. So let's go back out here. Let's show about the web editing. He's going to go into this open folder, sees this project or this workbook that he wants to see. If you look, he doesn't have the option to web edit the workbook. Does not have the option to edit the view. It's grayed out. Come back out though, I go into web edit, click in that workbook, I can web edit, I can download. So let's just go ahead and fire up one of these while we're looking at it. And remember, right now I'm only in the open network group. Only seeing this guy. So when I go to web edit, hit save as, only project I can go to is Sandbox. So let's say this guy gets desktop. Let's add him. Before I do that, let me come back here. Cancel this. Let's count the folders. Let's go back to this guy. So remember, we have 6 data sources, 41 projects. I'm going to spell open right this time. I'm going to add him to desk. Save it. Come back out here. Let's refresh it. We go from 6 data sources to 1,300. Projects go up to 67. All the controls now show up. So you can see all those data sources. I come back into web edit, do a save as, because I haven't assigned him a group yet. He's not part of an organization with folders. He still only sees Sandbox. Same thing with desktop. He can only publish to Sandbox. So let's make him now a developer. Put him here in this team dev. Come back out. Now project-wise, I'm at 67. Let's refresh it. Now I have 70. What was added? Limit, lock, and Sandbox were added. If I go back into the web edit, do a save as, now I can write to all those. So it's kind of the flow of how we use users. So they start at a web edit, they get desktop, they still do the same basic thing that they do with writing permissions. Once they get part of an organizational team, they can write to their own folders. Okay, so that was a demo. Now I know what you guys are thinking. I told you I had the server since 2010, 30,000 views. It's probably been there for years. No one's using it. Well, we actually do content purging. So when we say purge, we don't move it to archive. We get rid of it. And everything that goes to the server gets a shelf life, depends on where it's published. So if it's in a sandbox, whether it be open network sandbox or one of your team's sandboxes, it has a shelf life of 90 days. If it's not used in 90 days, we delete it. The reason why we think of that, sandbox is supposed to be your dev space. If you're developing something, you should be using it every day until you get this thing ready for production. And once it's in production, it's going to be gone anyway. And then for the web authoring, you have all these users that are just now playing with data. They're making this workbook. It's like kids at Christmas. They open up one present, they love it. And they open up the next one, they forget about that one. They keep moving on and on and on. Before you know it, they've made like 12 versions of the same report, and they're only using one of them. Well, that's why you put that shelf life on it. They can keep the one that they're using on a daily basis, fine. The other 11 that they created in the process, they'll get deleted after 90 days. We do send out a warning at 76 days and 83 days that say, hey, we're going to delete it. If it's any of the other projects, you get 180 days. And we send out warnings for 166 and 173. And if you have a data source that is running an extract, if no one uses that extract or that data source for 90 days, we remove the refresh. Even if it's in one of those 180-day folders, we remove the refresh because I'm not going to use my background processes to refresh something that no one's even looking at. You don't like that we're deleting your stuff? Use it. Use it or lose it. All you got to do is access it once and it resets the clock. So how we do all this is that viz I just showed in the previous slide. It's up on our server. We extract the data using tab command export, pull it out as a CSV, have a PowerShell script that loops through that CSV file and either sends out warnings or sends out deletes, and then deletes the thing by using a tab command delete script. So big thing to notice is we're still deleting or adding more than we're deleting. Like over here to the right, it's showing us that on our web authoring projects for 9/30 when this was taken, there was going to be 32 workbooks taken out of the web authoring folders, the sandboxes. And there was going to be 2 that were going to be deleted from the other ones. And those 32 workbooks associated 142 views. Yeah?
How do you guys differentiate between
Nice segue. You really can't. So how we keep track of what's using it is Postgres. So if you guys are new to server, there's a Postgres database that runs in the back end. Has a ton of tables, tons of ways to look at things. I'm just going to touch on the three favorites I have. First one is the HIS tables. Our data source on our server is actually called HIS table extravaganza because there's an extravaganza of data that you can get out of it. It has counts and timestamps for all kinds of events. Access, someone accesses the workbook, accesses the data source, it's stored in there. You add users, you delete stuff, you send subscriptions, it's all in there. It's really easy to use, the join's easy to do, it's got primary key and foreign key relationships. Only limitation that we run into is that since 10.0, it now only stores 183 days of data. So it used to be 9 months. Before that, it was wide open. Then it went to 9 months, I think, at 9.0, and now we went to 10, and they knocked it down to 183. When you have projects you're trying to shelf life at 180 days, well, depending on what it ran, we started having stuff that was making that cutoff. It wasn't getting deleted. That's what we found out as they changed it to 183. I talked to a dev this week. He said, though, he thinks that's settable, where you can bump it up if you want. But we just started copying off into our Netezza platform anyway. So no big deal. Next one's HTTP requests. This is awesome data. But it has start and stop times of any web-based event when they're in vSQL sessions or in the Apache part of the session. So things like bootstrap times. How long does it take a workbook to load? Filter changes. Once it loads, they change the filter. How long did it take for that view to render after they changed it? Tooltips. They hover over a dot on a map. How long did it take for that to get rendered? Parameter changes. They have parameters driving different metrics. View underlying data. I'll touch on that a little bit more. It's called VUD. They're just looking at the data and trying to export it. Great data, tricky little join, because the name of the user is only associated with when they're in the Apache part of the process. Once they switch over to vSQL, they're assigned a vSQL session ID, and that's the only thing you see. So you kind of got to do a join between those two files or those two queries in order to make it work. That's why we pull that off into Postgres or pull it off Postgres and store it in Netezza. Two reasons. So we're not doing that join on our production system. And the other thing is that table is cleaned up to 7 days every time you do a tab admin cleanup. So if you're doing a cleanup on a daily basis, you're only going to have 7 days of data in there. Maybe it's 14, but it is limited. Last one is data connections. I didn't show anything about it here, but that's how I know I have 83% of my content going to data sources of that one. That used to have a really crazy join you had to do in order to link all of your workbooks to what data sources, because you could have multiple data sources in a workbook. They made it easier in 10. It's still not clear cut, but it's a lot easier. So what else do we monitor? I'm going to go through some of these. Yeah.
Much further. My shop is definitely a lot smaller than yours. And we're just now thinking about doing the web authoring piece of it.
Okay.
So right now, when we retire a report, we actually keep an archive copy of that for a certain period of time. Do you do any of the archiving on the web edit pieces?
No, we don't archive anything. I do pull off backups every night, and then we store them. So we have a rolling 7-day backup that we keep of the server, and then I pull one off every month for 6 months. So if somebody comes back and says, oh, I did this thing back in June that I really wanted, but I never used it for 90 days and now it's gone, I can go get it, and I'll take that back up, I'll restore it to my beta system, give them that IP address instead, tell them to download it and republish it. I've done it twice this year, that's it. Somebody's come up to me at that. And it was actually people that were using an open folder. Yeah.
Along the same line with that, is auditing ever an issue for those workbooks?
By auditing, what do you mean by audit?
Sometimes, say if you're looking at financial data, sometimes maybe they want the audit department want to take a look at it.
Oh, like a more historical? Well, all your data is still stored in your database. We don't clean up anything database-wise. We just clean up the workbooks. Right now, our server is only running the network organization. I don't even have, the marketing, the finance, the sales, none of that. We are just one organization that's doing it.
Okay.
So. All right, so this is extract refresh monitoring. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hey. I have a quick question on the templates which you're publishing, right? So the templates which you're publishing for the users to do web edit, so are these templates pretty flat templates, or do they have action filters more interactive features, things
Yeah,
like
we'll
those?
set up the main filters. Our network's broken up into 99 markets. So each one of our templates has the market filter on it. And then we have other ones based on what type of one they're looking for. We have date filters built on it right away. But the big thing is we actually have a landing page on the front of it that just has verbiage. Hey, this is how you do it. This is where you start. You want to look at this. Here's a good place to it.
Okay. So isn't it confusing for users for modifying those version of the reports, because if they have a lot of interactivity built into them?
Yeah. So it's enough to at least get them started. But we also host weekly calls and do training sessions quite often. So it kind of keeps people engaged and answers the questions. Plus we have the wonders of Skype and IM. Mine's getting lit up all day long with just people going, how do I do this, how do I do that? But good thing with Tableau, it's easy to explain, move on.
Looks like a lot of departments use your Tableau server. Have you looked at using sites and site admins?
So the reason why we didn't do sites is because moving content from one to the other. You remember, we've been doing this since 2010. So there wasn't APIs. There wasn't all this other stuff that you can do now. All that stuff they showed you today was a pain if you had to move stuff. Basically, you had to download it from one site, republish to the other. Same thing with data sources. So if you have a workbook that's using a data source on this site, but you want both of them to move over, you're downloading both of them. You're moving them both over. Now you're moving both back up. You got to set all the relationship stuff back in. So we never went that way. Now they're having some advancements in it. If we start adding other organizations outside of network, we'll probably start looking more into sites. But right now, we want to leave it open. We want everybody in network to be able to use whatever we can and just use the projects to decipher what they can't use. Good. All right, so extract refreshes. There's a ton of stuff we watch, but I wanted to hit on some big ones. Extract refreshes, what we get with all these new desktop users, they're happy. They're looking at all this data. They're having a great old time with it. A lot of these guys were SQL guys. They have their own Access database running their laptop. They have SQL Server running in a machine underneath their desk. I get it. I was there. So we don't discourage it in any way, shape, or form. But what happens, a lot of these guys will add these data sources into a workbook embedded instead of having a published data source. So they'll have an hourly database that's running off of their SQL server. They have a weekly that's running off of Access, and they have a monthly that's sitting off of another SQL server somewhere else. But because they've also found the wonders of in-memory databasing with the extract engine, they'll extract it. Problem is that if you have 3 extracts embedded in a workbook and you schedule the refresh and you want to refresh your hourly data, even though you have these other ones that are only not getting updated because it's monthly data, Tableau will actually refresh every single one of your extracts within that workbook in a serial fashion. So they can tie up your resources for hours if you don't have all your timers and stuff set. Other things, these are databases sitting on somebody's desk. So sometimes you have bad query responses, bad indexing or partitioning, or the other thing is custom SQL. These guys are SQL guys. They see that little button for adding custom SQL and they're like, oh, I could write my selects, I can have my wheres, my group bys. I'm going to throw it all in there. Well, how Tableau treats that, if they apply any filters within their visualization that need to be applied, Tableau will treat that as a custom SQL as a subquery. So now they're doing full table scans, where they think they're just querying things for, hey, I only want the last 3 days, but because they set up in custom SQL, it's going to scan the entire table, pull that out, then find the last 3 days out of it. So we get that all the time. So what we do is we look at workbooks, or the other thing they do is they'll schedule a workbook to be refreshed hourly, but it's got daily data. They just don't know what they're doing. They pick the wrong schedule. We'll get that sometimes too. So how we monitor all this stuff is we use the Postgres. And there's another table that monitors your background tasks, how long it takes for it to complete, and it's kind of it's a yucky join in order to get it right down to it. But we look to see, well, how long does it take to refresh that extract, and how often is it being used? So this one is highlighted. The dot represents how long it takes to refresh that extract. It takes 42 minutes. That's fine. If everybody's using it, I don't mind if they eat up a resource for 42 minutes. But we find out the ratio. How many minutes of refresh does it take for every time it's looked at? That one takes 3.5 minutes of refresh time for every time it looks. He's refreshing it. Not enough people are using it. We don't discourage it. We just may move it. So if he's refreshing at 8 a.m., when everybody else wants to refresh at 8 a.m., but he's not looking at it until the following Thursday, let's make it weekly. Or can I move it out to 4 in the afternoon instead? If you're not looking at it, it's not dependent on previous day's data, Let's move it to a more user-friendly schedule. Next thing is subscriptions. We have all these end users. They web edit. They build this great view. It has a relative date filter on it. They want to subscribe to it because they want it delivered to them every morning. So we set it up so we allow them to do it. Problem is web authoring doesn't have, it allows them to do a lot of quick filters. Well, a lot of quick filters mean a lot of queries going back to your database. So sometimes it's not efficient. It makes it kind of slow. Other times is they'll throw a lot of data points on it. They're just making a big table. It's just huge. And sometimes they actually subscribe to every view in a workbook, not really understanding what they did. They started with one view, that little template we made that has 4 examples. Well, then they make another one, then they make another one. Before they know it, they're on sheet 78. Everybody's seen one of those workbooks with sheet 78 plus. And all they really care about is sheet 78. Well, if they go in and say subscribe to every sheet in the workbook, your server is now generating the visualization for all 78 of them. Ties up your resources. So very similar, we don't want to discourage it. We want to find out what happened. Hey, is there something we can do in the workbook to fix it? Or do we just need to move it to a different schedule? The ones highlighted, they want the subscription going at 9 a.m. I'm more concerned about those guys who are trying to get a subscription at the same time I'm doing all my extract refreshes than the guys that are going at 5 a.m. or 2 p.m. And this is VUDI. We're going to get into this really quick because we're running out of time. So in the HTTP request table, there's a column called Actions, and there's a field called VUD, and that's View Underlying Data. So we have users that are exporting data. So we monitor these users to say, how often are they doing it? Like that top line, that guy there, 63% of the time that he launches a VisQL session, he exports data. So they're just using it as a CSV build generator. Other thing we do is we look at the views. Was a view created for the sole purpose of exporting data? That top one, 300% of the time it's used from view VUDI. What that means is the guy opens it, exports the data, changes the filter, exports again, changes the filter, exports it again. He's just creating CSVs out of it. So these are resource hogs. It takes a lot, and it's just frustrating because they're just pulling out, putting it in Excel to make a chart when they can do it all within web authoring. So we find out these users and see what's going on and ask them, what the bud, man? And what we find out is we start finding users that need desktop. Example, this guy here, he was VUDing 31% of the time. So we've called him up and like, why are you doing this? Turns out he loved Tableau, he loved web authoring, thought it was great, but he always had to analyze data from other organizations who used Excel. So they were sending him Excel files. He had to mirror it with the stuff that's in our data sources. He couldn't get the Excel up into Tableau because he didn't have desktop. So he had to export out of Tableau into Excel. We gave him a desktop, taught him how to blend. Now he subscribes to it, gets it every morning. And the big thing is, we build tons of stuff. I showed you a couple ones. The big thing is use that Postgres. Use any other skills that you have. If you've got some programming skills, some database skills, dashboard skills, nunchuck skills, it doesn't matter. If you have the desire to know exactly what's going on in your server, use Tableau to manage your Tableau. Make the visualization, hit into the data, and subscribe to it. 10.1, they just came out with conditional subscriptions. So you can have it email you when something happens. Learn from your mistakes. Something happens, go back into your data, see what the data was telling you before it happened, and then set up a viz to tell you when those same criteria happen again. Subscribe to it. I get probably about 30 emails a day from my server just in subscriptions to keep me track of things. And the last thing, closing statement, is make friends. You know what? Tableau sits in the middle of your end users and your DBAs. When performance is bad, neither one likes you. And they always blame Tableau. End user only sees Tableau, DBA only sees queries coming from Tableau. So work with them. This example here is how we worked with the DBA and the dashboard developer to improve response times. He had this dashboard that was taking, and this is median response times for queries on that dashboard. It was taking 13 seconds just to change a filter. What we do is we set up a test plan, changing these certain filters on his dashboard, and document it. Show him how long it does, turn on performance record on the dashboard, see how long it takes. Have the DBA make a change. We knocked it from 13 down to 5 seconds. Go through the same test plan again, make another change. Hey, we knocked it down to 3 seconds. So we keep working through this process till we get to the end performance desired, which was sub 3 seconds for all the queries. So, big thing is work with everybody. You're a translator as a server admin. And with that, It's in for Q&A, but I think we're pretty close on time, too.
Oh, yeah, I got it. So, okay. So you have users that are basically finding this jumping off point that's been built by someone maybe with a desktop. Do you expect, especially with the additions of, in Tableau 10, to have some of these users go directly to the data sources themselves and create not sheets, which was like 9 in previous,
Right.
but workbooks themselves?
Well, what we do is eliminate it right now. Because they can't see the data sources, they can't just collect on it. So right now, let me click this guy back out to, let me get rid of desktop. Him. Let's put him back out to just a normal user. He only sees those 6 data sources. So he can't click on a data source to start web authoring without having that template. He doesn't know they exist.
Would you see that being, at Starbucks, that's what we're trying to do right now, and we're wondering if it's going to be something that's difficult to convince people to have a starting off point, or maybe we're thinking, do we limit the desktop licenses and put analysts in this environment?
Yeah. So we don't want to ever limit people from trying things. What we do is we make sure that there is a path for them to follow. So they start with this. They have to start with templates. Now, because I have that open network desk group, they don't technically have to have desktop to get into it. They just can't see data sources until get into it. So when you have those users that fall in that category like you're talking about, hey, well, you can now make dashboards in 10, just put them in that group. They can still see all the data sources without having desktop. They could click on the data source and start new.
I have a question about the data governance. So for people who have access to a more restricted project like log, and then they can also save to open. So when they do save as and in the job box, job down list, they can save to either.
Correct.
So what if they make a mistake? They save some restricted content rather than save it to log. Now they save it to open, and now all your user can see those content.
Yeah. Well, you do have to, we still make sure the end user's got to know what they're doing. So that's why we lay out that path, make sure they do it. If they do move things, as an admin, you can move stuff from project to project. They don't have to keep republishing it. But it's the end user's content. That's the big thing is we're providing a platform. The content belongs to the end user, and the responsibility belongs to the end user.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you publish the PDLs or the PDS, what you're saying, as extracts, or these are live data connections?
Most of them are live. We have a really good Netezza system that most of our stuff goes to, but we do have extracts that we run. It's probably more of like a 85-15 kind of mix, I'd say, at the most.
So do you give capability for user to refresh the extracts?
Yes, and then we monitor it with that view to make sure they do it.
So that means you make the...
We let them try it, and then we correct them when they do it wrong.
So
we
you make
slap
them the
hands.
owner of the data source?
Yeah, the data source owner is responsible for scheduling the refresh, and then we just
I see.
educate.
Thank you.
So when you publish the data source, sometimes the data sources are pretty large. Do you ever worry about, like, say if a user just drag on like 12 million records onto the workbook by accident?
Yeah, we've seen those before. Actually, on our Netezza system, we set up, because we use Netezza and we also have Teradata. On our Netezza system, we actually set up a row limitation. So if the user drags something out, they only get 250,000 rows max
Okay.
that show up. But we don't have that limitation with our Teradata, unfortunately. But that's on the database side. That's not in Tableau.
Okay, thanks.
So how are you guys doing? Who publishes your data sources and who creates those? How do you
Anybody
guys
knows.
manage that? Anybody can do that?
Any of those teams. So if you have a team folder, then you can put into it. So like these 6 I see here, these are data sources that are in Open Network Sandbox. So we allow anybody to put stuff up into a data source if they want, but they have the understanding that you put in Sandbox, anybody can use it. Anybody can use it. Once they get their projects, that team is responsible for any data source they publish within their product.
So you guys don't have any concept of a data steward or anything like that?
No.
To make sure you get correct data sources, make sure people are coming to the correct conclusions. 'Cause that's one thing we're really worried about is incorrect data sources that have wrong joins and things, et cetera, et cetera.
So each team has, so when you have that open, like network engineering, they had a team of developers that defined the data sources and made sure they're legit. So that new stuff they were showing yesterday about certified, I'm kind of curious how that's all going to pan out and who's allowed to certify. If admins have to certify everything, that's going to be way too much work for me. I'll find a new job. But if the end user can still do it, then it works out great.
So in this screen, you're saying publisher 1, publisher 2, and publisher 3. Who are these users? I mean, these are the end users.
This is one of
or
those
this is
1,300.
Automated users.
Yep, because since it's in Sandbox, it's anybody that has access to Sandbox, so it's an entire network organization can publish to there.
So he would be the owner, and he will publish
Yep.
refresh the extracts.
Yep, he's on. So we allow them to publish whatever they think they need, but we police it using all of our visualizations off the Postgres and other things we pull in.
Any other questions? One more. The last one.
So would you be willing to share with the group or the conference the Postgres monitoring workbook you have or the joins that you've created?
Well, since it's not actually, since we pull everything off the Netezza, I won't have that for you, but we could do the joins. What you probably do is reach out to me afterwards. Yeah, yeah. Especially with the HIS tables. Yep, yep. The new ones with 10 want the data connections. That's like I just figured out a couple weeks ago, so it's new. I'm sorry? Yeah, I think they upload everything after the conference.
All right. Thanks everybody for coming, and please give a big hand to our speaker. Thank you.